Hi, folks. Welcome back after lunch. I hope there weren't too many carbs on the menu. I looked for the salad bar, really, but I couldn't find it. Welcome back. Thank you for attending. I think some of these tracks, it's a bit of a competitive situation. We're fighting for people to come and listen to what, hopefully, value we have to talk about. So thank you. Let's just dive straight into it. We've heard a lot about GenAI. I'm sure you can't turn around without seeing this and having people ask you about what flavor and what would you like to do with GenAI and how can GenAI save your life or that. And I thought it might be an interesting place to start to say, where is GenAI right now? And I just found this video and I thought you might find it amusing and we'll just dive into it. So this is what GenAI thinks human movement is like, and this is how people behave. I think this was like when the shrooms and the acid started, really, it was just like a bad reaction, One what this guy was on. So sometimes, we see the stuff that's been generated by Sora and whatever else. Looks fantastic, right? But those are very, very specific prompts on very, very specific data meant to give you that wow factor. When you actually ask it to just go wild, it does. I'm not sure how we would ever replicate that. But anyway, so I think it's important for us, as security professionals, to separate the fact from fiction. Because I know you guys probably in every day somebody's asking you to do something more and insane and crazy and with less budget or with less people or with the same, or can't we just do this with AI? And you're like, it's a coffee machine, guys. There's only so much you could do with AI in that space. So I thought it'd be useful to give CISOs a bit of a field guide. And what I mean by a field guide is that this is kind of a thing that we have within Deloitte it's a bit of a living document. So as the space evolves, we kind of populate this, we update it with kind of what's happening. Because there's just so much of movement in the space, it's extremely difficult to kind of keep track of what's going on. So just as an outset, I've got 15 minutes, I'm going to whiz through some of this stuff. But as a baseline, and I think these slides will be shared, so don't worry about trying to memorize stuff and things like that. I'm happy to share it. But just to give you a view of what GenAI is, right, and why is this so special? 20 years ago, the big thing in computing was we're going to use laptops. Wow. If you think about mobile devices and where they were 20 years ago to where they are now, if you think about your laptop 20 years ago to where it is now, the laptop's kind of stayed in the Stone Age. It's pretty much the same form factor. It's still got a mouse and a trackpad and a screen and all that stuff. It still takes forever to boot, right? You've got a processor that can launch space shuttles, and you still got to wait for Teams for 5 minutes to figure out what it's doing, right? But your mobile is actually, if you think about it, your dependable workhorse. You pull it out, check mails, do things, browse the web. It's quick, it's fast, it's reliable. It gets it done, right? GenAI is to computing now what mobile was and is to laptops 20 years ago. This is the worst it will ever be. And that is the scary thing, because it's absolutely not a way of doing things. We were in a conversation with a client the other day, and they were talking about, what does an economist's job look like in 2030? I was like, why do you need an economist in 2030? What does that person do? If they're just taking data, crunching it, and giving you an output, congratulations, that is exactly what AI does. The more routine the data, the more routine the work, the more precise the outcomes, the better suited to AI. So think about that, right? This is not just clever marketing and fancy shenanigans. It is actually, it's a monumental change. It's a shift in the way that we actually think about our own roles sometimes, and scary, in the world. I know there's a lot of focus around compliance, and I can tell you guys as a previous CISO, 40% of my time was spent on reporting on stuff. You think, I'm going to be a CISO. That's so cool. I'm going to be doing all this incident stuff. Incidents 15 minutes, reporting 6 weeks. It's like, suck the joy out of life, tell me. But there is a wealth of legal framework, wealth of legal knowledge that is available. And this is important because it's incredibly difficult to go back and retrospectively make something compliant. It's very difficult to unbuild a house and rebuild it. So you'd rather just take cognizance of what's happening Even if some of this regulation is still pretty new, it's still emerging, as I told you, no one's got the space figured out. They will try and tell you that. Take cognizance of the regulations, take cognizance of what you're doing, and try and kind of steer the ship using some good principles, good practices, right? And also try to steer clear of the pitfalls. This thing is not perfect by any means, right? If you remember the gymnasts, one of the ones that made headlines the other day was hallucination. So GenAI, you take old, you create new. The new doesn't necessarily have to be real. And a bunch of lawyers in New York found this out by using ChatGPT to generate documents for submission to court. And it was cases that were false. Those cases didn't exist. And those lawyers were disbarred. Now, can you imagine when you have a doctor who's trying to use GenAI, patient has a headache, blah, blah, congratulations, it's cancer. That's like your WebMD answer. GenAI is going to come up with something even more creative, right? So you're going to have looking for like West Nile virus in everybody and all sorts of manic behavior because AI said. So let's be very clear around there are risks, there are limitations, right? There is a very strong bias focus. In South Africa, we are not Western Europe, we are not Asia, we are not North America. Our per capita, our incomes, etc., all very different. And why it's important is that AI gets used quite often to kind of generate interest rates for home loans. So if you think about it, it's gathering a lot of information about a particular person. It's kind of looking at what is this person's kind of profile, how do they behave, where do they live, how long have they lived, blah, 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 blah. And then they say, well, this guy looks like he's a good risk, primeless one. But now if you go and put in Western European data and you normalize for rands and you realize this guy is living in poverty, your interest rate will be like prime plus 10. That's an immediate bias. The data is skewed because the fundamental underlying fabric of your AI assumptions was wrong. So you've got to be very careful about when you're buying off-the-shelf stuff and using it in your own environments as well, right? The other bit coming into this is around what is the model of AI that you want to consume? We are all very familiar with AI as a service, which is the extreme right-hand side. That's the ChatGPTs, the Llamas, the Claudes, the Opuses, all of the stuff that's being built as a service, right? Which has its place. It's a very nice sandbox for you and your innovation teams to go and play, see what's available, ask it to do a security strategy, ask it to go and give you a risk framework. It is really good at doing that because that's what the models were trained on, right? Ask it to do a BCM plan, cool. Ask it how to roll back CrowdStrike updates, maybe not so cool, but you can try, right? And that's because it is a general purpose model that's been built for that sort of stuff. If you're going to do something serious in-house with your own information, where you need to rely on the results, and you need to take those results and actually do something that is important to your business, you are probably going to go more towards a private, internally developed architecture. And this is really kind of using those LLM tools, the frameworks, but using your own data. Now, I don't know about you guys. In Deloitte, we have a tool called KX, it's called Knowledge Exchange, which is supposed to be like the where you go and find all the answers. And you can get lost in there for days, and you'll forget what you were looking for, but you didn't find the answer. So, if you guys are in that sort of data management, knowledge management space, that's a great use case for your LLMs. Put your stuff in. Take your strategies, your proposals, your information, put it in there, and make it searchable, make it usable in a way that you didn't think was possible previously, that without like a flat Google type search. And that's a nice way to build business value and actually see whether this thing is actually usable in your world as well, right? So that's the modalities. From a risk and a cyber perspective, there are seriously, a few things that we got to look at. And luckily, lots of very clever guys have given this some thought. So the first thing is about AI does have some unique risks. Some of the further slides you'll see, some of the risks are also kind of common across other things because of the underlying infrastructure and fabric, but there are some unique risks, like the data risk, the bias, hallucinations, all of that sort of stuff, repeatability, traceability, all of that sort of stuff. There's the technology risk, and this is really talking about if you're using cloud infrastructure or you're using on-prem, it's all the usual infrastructure type risks that we know and love that come into play. And then you've got the regulations, right? And the regulations are the bits that are actually going to be quite a compelling case to give us directionally where we need to go. So if you are using AI for financial model, credit risk modeling, all of that sort of stuff, you need to show from input to output how you got your answer. If you're using it in a trading flow environment, from input to output, how did you get your answer? What is the repeatability? What is the traceability? Because it's incredibly important that when people look at the data that you provide, that there is confidence in what you're saying. One of the challenges if you'll try with ChatGPT is you can give it the same prompt 3 times in a row, you will get 3 different answers, or 3 variations on the answers. That's not good enough when you're talking about, really, really high critical and or high profile and critical kind of activities like financial and healthcare, etc. You don't want to tell the patients it's a headache, or maybe you got shot, or maybe that doesn't work, right? So how do you build confidence on this thing that it does work? And there's a whole bunch of OWASP and MITRE kind of things to look at as well. And we'll talk about that in a little bit more detail just now. Coming to a framework, it wouldn't be a Deloitte presentation if we didn't give you a very complex framework with lots of blocks and moving parts. This is why it's a handout as well, so you can have a look at it. But it really talks around looking at the threats, the risks, the regulations, the standards, and trustworthy AI goals. Trustworthy AI goals is what's been kind of promulgated by the European regulators, but there's also a whole lot of things about trustworthy AI. And using what we have now, and I think that's the important bit that we go back to our organizations with. Using what we have now, how do we adopt this? Because there's not going to be, AI-specific firewalls, AI-specific DLP. You'll get the marketing wear, but it'll be the same old tooling with an AI sticker on it, right? So we have to have a plan, as Dom said this morning, to get there from here. We know here, we don't know what there looks like, honestly. So how do we take the stuff that we have now and kind of look at this in a minimum viable product way? How do you channel that when the guys who are going to play with this stuff are not just taking your entire internet and dumping it onto an AWS cloud storage system and then mining it? That's cool for that guy, and not so cool for you when you've got to go and figure out how do we get our data back? Has it been lost? What's the investigation? Who accessed it? All the stuff that we have to live with in the real world, right? So there's a couple of things here that really comes into it, and I think it speaks to how does cyber integrate into the organization? Again, as much as we're talking about this is an AI conversation, do we have visibility of all of these different innovation streams and who's playing with AI in our world? Because there are people playing with it, right? It's a usable tool. It seems to be very valuable, and there's a lot of interest. So again, shadow IT, DevSecOps, secure coding practices, code verification, all the stuff that we have now that needs to go into that space as well. The one bit that we're finding AI being used for quite often and quite usably is third-party risk management. Now, if you think about your environment, right? If you're a large bank, you probably have 10,000 plus vendors. If you're a mining house, you've probably got a couple of hundred, maybe 1,000, but there's probably always a handful of guys who are incredibly meaningful to the business, high-risk vendors, right? So third-party risk management is an incredibly labor-intensive process, and by using AI tools to go and mine, scrape data, etc., and complete questionnaires and all of those sort of things, you can actually get a better handle on your third-party risk landscape. And in cyber, that's actually one of the first use cases that we are seeing, because it's quite a tough problem to solve, but it needs to be solved. The other one we're talking about, and we're seeing quite often, is around audit-ready ERP. And audit-ready means that when you go in and the auditors arrive and they want to see all sorts of reports and that sort of stuff, the ERP is using an AI engine to generate those reports to give to auditors, so you don't have to go and spend days and hours looking for that information and ferreting around. So there are a couple of very, very useful cases. And there's a couple of very real cases that you can look at now. But that notion that, don't worry, guys, we're going to stick GenAI on top of our SIM, and we don't need L1, L2 monitoring anymore because it's going to take care of it, maybe in 5 years' time. And there's a roadmap to get there. Today, we just have weird-looking gymnasts. Cool. Thanks, Chris. I think we're on time. The rest of this is actually just going into detail about each of these. And as I said, I'll share these slides so you can actually have a look at it. And this was just a quick talk, right? Happy to take feedback, happy to engage further for where you guys are and that sort of stuff and have a discussion. And let's build community and have this as a talking point amongst ourselves, in terms of how we share this journey going forward. Thanks, guys. Cheers.